Hello friends, I'm Ellie. Welcome to Cardboard Design. Today, please continue to listen to the meaningful fairy tales that I will tell you right here. I hope you will like it. The first fairy tale, The Child in the Grave. It was a very sad day, and every heart in the house felt the deepest grief. For the youngest child, a boy of 4 years old, the joy and hope of his parents, was dead. 2 daughters, the elder of whom was going to be confirmed, still remained. They were both good, charming girls, but the lost child always seems the dearest, and when it is youngest, and a son, it makes the trial still more heavy. The sisters mourned as young hearts can mourn, and were especially grieved at the sight of their parents' sorrow. The father's heart was bowed down, but the mother sunk completely under the deep grief. Day and night she had attended to the sick child, nursing and carrying it in her bosom, as a part of herself. She could not realize the fact that the child was dead, and must be laid in a coffin to rest in the ground. She thought God could not take her darling little one from her, and when it did happen, notwithstanding her hopes and her belief, and there could be no more doubt on the subject, she said in her feverish agony,
God does not know it. He has hard-hearted ministering spirits on earth, who do according to their own will, and heed not a mother's prayers.
Thus in her great grief she fell away from her faith in God, and dark thoughts arose in her mind respecting death and a future state. She tried to believe that man was but dust, and that with his life all existence ended. But these doubts were no support to her, nothing on which she could rest, and she sunk into the fathomless depths of despair. In her darkest hours she ceased to weep, and thought not of the young daughters who were still left to her. The tears of her husband fell on her forehead, but she took no notice of him. Her thoughts were with her dead child. Her whole existence seemed wrapped up in the remembrances of the little one and of every innocent word it had uttered. The day of the little child's funeral came. For nights previously the mother had not slept, but in the morning twilight of this day, she sunk from weariness into a deep sleep. In the meantime the coffin was carried into a distant room, and there nailed down, that she might not hear the blows of the hammer. When she awoke, and wanted to see her child, the husband, with tears, said,
We have closed the coffin. It was necessary to do so.
When God is so hard to me, how can I expect men to be better?
She said with groans and tears. The coffin was carried to the grave, and the disconsolate mother sat with her young daughters. She looked at them, but she saw them not, for her thoughts were far away from the domestic hearth. She gave herself up to her grief, and it tossed her to and fro, as the sea tosses a ship without compass or rudder. So the day of the funeral passed away, and similar days followed, of dark, wearisome pain. With tearful eyes and mournful glances, the sorrowing daughters and the afflicted husband looked upon her who would not hear their words of comfort. And, indeed, what comforting words could they speak, when they were themselves so full of grief? It seemed as if she would never again know sleep, and yet it would have been her best friend, one who would have strengthened her body and poured peace into her soul. They at last persuaded her to lie down, and then she would lie as still as if she slept. One night, when her husband listened, as he often did, to her breathing, he quite believed that she had at length found rest and relief in sleep. He folded his arms and prayed, and soon sunk himself into healthful sleep. Therefore he did not notice that his wife arose, threw on her clothes, and glided silently from the house to go where her thoughts constantly lingered, to the grave of her child. She passed through the garden to a path across a field that led to the churchyard. No one saw her as she walked, nor did she see anyone, for her eyes were fixed upon the one object of her wanderings. It was a lovely starlight night in the beginning of September, and the air was mild and still. She entered the churchyard, and stood by the little grave, which looked like a large nosegay of fragrant flowers. She sat down, and bent her head low over the grave, as if she could see her child through the earth that covered him, her little boy, whose smile was so vividly before her, and the gentle expression of whose eyes, even on his sickbed, she could not forget. How full of meaning that glance had been, as she leaned over him, holding in hers the pale hand which he had no longer strength to raise. As she had sat by his little cot, so now she sat by his grave, and here she could weep freely, and her tears fell upon it.
Thou wouldst gladly go down and be with thy child,
said a voice quite close to her, a voice that sounded so deep and clear, that it went to her heart. She looked up, and by her side stood a man wrapped in a black cloak. with a hood closely drawn over his face, but her keen glance could distinguish the face under the hood. It was stern, yet awake in confidence, and the eyes beamed with youthful radiance.
Down to my child.
She repeated, and tones of despair and entreaty sounded in the words.
Darest thou to follow me?
Asked the form.
I am death.
She bowed her head in token of assent. Then suddenly it appeared as if all the stars were shining with the radiance of the full moon on the many-colored flowers that decked the grave. The earth that covered it was drawn back like a floating drapery. She sunk down, and the specter covered her with a black cloak. Night closed around her, the night of death. She sank deeper than the spade of the sexton could penetrate, till the churchyard became a roof above her. Then the cloak was removed, and she found herself in a large hall of wide-spreading dimensions, in which there was a subdued light, like twilight, reigning, and in a moment her child appeared before her, smiling, and more beautiful than ever. With a silent cry she pressed him to her heart. A glorious strain of music sounded, now distant, now near. Never had she listened to such tones as these. They came from beyond a large dark curtain which separated the regions of death from the land of eternity.
My sweet, darling mother,
she heard the child say. It was the well-known, beloved voice, and kiss followed kiss, in boundless delight. Then the child pointed to the dark curtain.
there is nothing so beautiful on earth as it is here. Mother, do you not see them all? Oh, it is happiness indeed.
But the mother saw nothing of what the child pointed out, only the dark curtain. She looked with earthly eyes, and could not see as the child saw, he whom God has called to be with himself. She could hear the sounds of music, but she heard not the words, the word in which she was to trust.
I can fly now, mother.
Said the child.
I can fly with other happy children into the presence of the Almighty. I would fain fly away now, but if you weep for me as you are weeping now, you may never see me again. And yet I would go so gladly. May I not fly away? And you will come to me soon, will you not, dear mother?
Oh, stay, stay.
Implored the mother.
Only one moment more, only once more, that I may look upon thee, and kiss thee, and press thee to my heart.
Then she kissed and fondled her child. Suddenly her name was called from above. What could it mean? Her name uttered in a plaintive voice.
Hearest thou?
Said the child.
It is my father who calls thee.
And in a few moments deep sighs were heard, as of children weeping.
They are my sisters.
Said the child.
Mother, surely you have not forgotten them.
And then she remembered those she left behind, and a great terror came over her. She looked around her at the dark night. Dim forms flitted by. She seemed to recognize some of them, as they floated through the regions of death towards the dark curtain, where they vanished. Would her husband and her daughters flit past? No, their sighs and lamentations still sounded from above, and she had nearly forgotten them, for the sake of him who was dead.
Mother, now the bells of heaven are ringing.
Said the child.
Mother, the sun is going to rise.
An overpowering light streamed in upon her. The child had vanished, and she was being borne upwards. All around her became cold. She lifted her head, and saw that she was lying in the churchyard, on the grave of her child. The Lord, in a dream, had been a guide to her feet and a light to her spirit. She bowed her knees, and prayed for forgiveness. She had wished to keep back a soul from its immortal flight. She had forgotten her duties towards the living who were left her. And when she had offered this prayer, her heart felt lighter. The sun burst forth. Over her head a little bird caroled his song, and the church bells sounded for the early service. Everything around her seemed holy, and her heart was chastened. She acknowledged the goodness of God. She acknowledged the duties she had to perform, and eagerly she returned home. She bent over her husband, who still slept. Her warm, devoted kiss awakened him, and words of heartfelt love fell from the lips of both. Now she was gentle and strong as a wife can be, and from her lips came the words of faith.
Whatever he doth is right and best.
Then her husband asked,
From whence hast thou all at once derived such strength and comforting faith?
and as she kissed him and her children, she said,
It came from God through my child in the grave.
The narrative focuses on the agony and loss experienced when a mother confronts the death of her child. The grief becomes especially intense when the child is the youngest. the joy and hope of the family. The story portrays the pain of loss that causes the mother to lose faith and hope in the future. The mother struggles with doubts about the afterlife, contemplating mortality and the end of existence. The mother goes through a period of regret as she realizes the consequences of her decision not to rest and seek comfort in sleep. This regret leads her to a state of consciousness and a quest for forgiveness. The narrative also represents the mother's journey in seeking hope and newfound faith. The appearance of God in a dream and the encounter with death open up opportunities for her to reevaluate and change her life. The story illustrates the mother's struggle with grief and her attempt to grapple with the concept of death and an uncertain future. Her faith is challenged, but she ultimately finds solace and strength in divine guidance. The tale is a journey from pain and despair to inner strength and faith. The mother learns to accept the truth and believes that whatever he doth is right and best. The story is also a narrative of the mother's hopeful quest, marked by a visitation from her deceased child and a symbolic ascent towards spiritual enlightenment. Ultimately, the story emphasizes the importance of survival and responsibility towards the living. The mother realizes her responsibility and duty to those still alive, embracing the significance of life. In summary, the story portrays pain, regret, and ultimately, a journey towards recovery and belief, offering insights into the value of life and our responsibilities to one another. The second fairy tale. Beautiful. Alfred the sculptor. Yes, you know him, don't you? We all know him. He was awarded the gold medal, traveled to Italy, and came home again. He was young then. In fact, he is still young, though he is 10 years older than he was at that time. After he returned home, he visited one of the little provincial towns on the island of Zealand. The whole village knew who the stranger was, and in his honor one of the richest families gave a party. Everyone of any importance or owning any property was invited. It was quite an event, and all the village knew about it without its being announced by the town crier. Apprentice boys and the children of poor people, and even some of their parents, stood outside the house looking at the lighted windows with their drawn curtains, and the watchman could imagine that he was giving the party. There were so many people in his street. There was an air of festivity everywhere and inside the house, too, for Mr. Alfred the sculptor was there. He talked and told stories, and everybody listened to him with pleasure and enthusiasm, but none more so than the elderly widow of a state official. As far as Mr. Alfred was concerned, she was like a blank sheet of gray blotting paper, absorbing everything that was said and demanding more. She was highly susceptible and unbelievably ignorant, a sort of female Caspar Hauser.
I should love to see Rome,
she said.
It must be a wonderful city, with all the many strangers continually arriving there. Now do tell us what Rome is like. How does the city look when you come in by the gate?
It is not easy to describe it,
said the young sculptor.
There's a great open place, and in the middle of it there is an obelisk that is 4,000 years old.
An organist, cried the lady, who had never heard the word obelisk. Some of the guests could hardly keep from laughing, among them the sculptor, but the smile that rose to his lips quickly faded away, for he saw close by the lady a pair of dark blue eyes. They belonged to the daughter of the lady who had been talking. And anyone with such a daughter could not really be silly. The mother was like a fountain of questions, and the daughter, who listened silently, might pass for the naiad of the fountain. How beautiful she was! She was something for a sculptor to look at, but not to speak with, for indeed she talked but very little.
Has the Pope a large family?
Asked the lady. And the young man answered considerately, as if the question had been put differently.
No, he doesn't come of a very great family.
That's not what I mean,
said the lady.
I mean, does he have a wife and children?
The Pope isn't allowed to marry,
he replied.
I don't approve of that,
said the lady. She might well have talked and questioned him more intelligently, but if she hadn't said and asked what she did, would her daughter have leaned so gracefully on her shoulder, looking straight before her with an almost melancholy smile on her lips. And Mr. Alfred told them of the glorious colors of Italy, the purple of the mountains, the blue of the Mediterranean, the blue of the southern skies, a beauty that could only be surpassed in the north by the deep blue eyes of a maiden. This he said with peculiar meaning, but she who should have understood it looked quite unconscious, and that, too, was charming.
Italy.
Sighed some of the guests.
Traveling.
Sighed others.
Charming, charming.
Well,
Said the widow.
if I win $50,000 in the lottery, we'll travel. My daughter and I. You, Mr. Alfred, must be our guide. We'll all three go, with just one or two good friends with us.
Then she smiled in such a friendly manner at the company that each of them could imagine he was the person who would accompany them to Italy.
Yes, we'll go to Italy. But not to the parts where the robbers are. We'll stay in Rome and only travel by the great highways where we'll be safe.
And the daughter sighed very gently. And how much may lie in one little sigh or be read into it? The young man read a great deal into it. Those two blue eyes bright that evening in his honor must conceal treasures of heart and mind rarer than all the glories of Rome. When he left the party, he had lost his heart, lost it completely to the young lady. Now, the widow's house was where Mr. Alfred the sculptor could most frequently be found. It was understood that his calls were not for the lady herself, though he and she did all the talking. He really came for the sake of the daughter. They called her Kala. Her real name was Karen Malie, but the two names had been contracted into the single name Kala. She was extremely, but some people said she was rather dull and probably slept late in the morning.
She has been accustomed to that since childhood,
Said her mother.
She is as beautiful as Venus, and a beauty always tires easily. She does sleep rather late, but that's what makes her eyes so bright.
What a power there was in these clear eyes, these deep blue eyes. Still waters run deep. The young man felt the truth of that proverb, and his heart sank into the depths. He spoke of his adventures, and Mama always asked the same naive and pertinent questions she had asked at their first meeting. It was a delight to hear Mr. Alfred speak. He told them of Naples, of trips to Mount Vesuvius, and showed them colored prints of some of the eruptions. The widow had never heard of such things before, much less taken time to think about them.
Mercy save us.
She said,
So that's a burning mountain. But isn't it dangerous for the people who live there?
Entire cities have been destroyed.
he answered.
For example, Pompeii and Herculaneum.
Oh, the poor people. And you saw all that yourself.
Well, no, I didn't see any of the eruptions shown in these pictures, but I'll show you a drawing I made of an eruption I did see.
He laid a pencil sketch on the table, and when Mama, who had been studying the highly colored prints, glanced at the black and white drawing, she cried in amazement.
When you saw it, did it throw up white fire?
For a moment, Alfred's respect for Kala's Mama nearly vanished, but then, dazzled by the light from Kala, he decided it was natural for the old lady to have no eye for color. After all, it didn't matter, for Kala's Mama had the most wonderful thing of all. She had Kala herself. And Alfred and Kala were engaged, which was inevitable, and the engagement was announced in the town newspaper. Mama brought 30 copies of the paper, so she could cut out the announcement and send it to her friends. The betrothed couple were happy, and the mama-in-law to be was happy, too. She said it seemed like being related to Thorvaldsen himself.
At any rate, you are his successor,
She told Alfred. And it seemed to Alfred that Mama had this time really said something clever. Kala said nothing, but her eyes sparkled. Her every gesture was graceful. Yes, she was beautiful. That cannot be repeated too often. Alfred made busts of Kala and his future mama-in-law. They sat for him and watched how he molded and smoothed the soft clay between his fingers.
I suppose it's only for us that you do this common work?
Said mama-in-law to be.
And don't have your servant do all that dabbing together.
No, I have to mold the clay myself.
He explained.
Oh yes, you're always so exceedingly polite.
Said Mama, while Kala silently pressed his hand, still soiled by the clay. Then he unfolded to both of them the loveliness of nature in creation, explaining how the living stood higher in the scale than the dead, How the plant was above the mineral, the animal above the plant, and man above the animal. How mind and beauty are united in outward form. And how it was the task of the sculptor to seize that beauty and imprison it in his works. Kala sat silent and nodded approval of the thought, while Mama-in-law confessed.
It's hard to follow all that. But my thoughts managed to hobble slowly along after you. They were around, but I tried to hold them fast.
And the power of Kala's beauty held Alfred fast, seizing him and mastering him and filling his whole soul. There was beauty in Kala's every feature. It sparkled in her eyes, lurked in the corners of her mouth, and even in each movement of her fingers. The sculptor saw this. He spoke only of her, thought only of her, until the two became one. Thus it might be said that she also spoke often, for he was always talking of her, and they two were one. Such was the betrothal. And now came the wedding day, with bridesmaids and presents, all duly mentioned in the wedding speech. Mama-in-law had set up a bust of Thorvaldsen, attired in a dressing gown, at one end of the table, for it was her whim that he was to be a guest. There were songs and toasts, for it was a gay wedding and they were a handsome pair. Pygmalion gets his Galatea. One of the songs said,
That is something from mythology,
said Mama-in-law. Next day, the young couple left for Copenhagen, where they were to live. Mama-in-law went with them, to give them a helping hand. She explained which meant to take charge of the house. Kala was to live in a doll's house. Everything was so bright, new, and fine. There the three of them sat. And as for Alfred, to use a proverb that describes his circumstances, he sat like the bishop in the goose yard. The magic of form had fascinated him. He had regarded the case and had no interest in learning what the case contained, and that is unfortunate, very unfortunate, in married life. If the case breaks and the gilding rubs off, the purchaser may repent of his bargain. It is very embarrassing to discover in a large party that one's suspender buttons are coming off and that one has no belt to fall back on, but it is still worse to realize at a great party that one's wife and mother-in-law are talking nonsense and that one cannot think of a clever piece of wit to cover up the stupidity of it. The young couple often sat hand in hand, he speaking and she letting drop a word now and then with always the same melody, like a clock striking the same 2 or 3 notes constantly. It was really a mental relief when one of her friends, Sophie, came to visit them. Sophie wasn't pretty. To be short, she was not deformed. Kala always said she was a little crooked, but no one but a female friend would have noticed that. She was a very level-headed girl and had no idea that she might ever become dangerous here. Her visits brought a fresh breath of air into the doll's house, air that they all agreed was certainly needed there. But they felt they needed more airing, so they came out into the air, and Mama-in-law and the young couple traveled to Italy.
Thank heaven we are back in our own home again,
said both mother and daughter when they and Alfred returned home a year later.
Wow! Traveling is no fun,
said Mama-in-law.
On the contrary, it's very tiring, pardon me for saying so. I found the time dragged, even though I had my children with me, and it is expensive, very expensive to travel. All those galleries you have to see and all the things you have to look at. You must do it for self-protection, because when you get back, people are sure to ask you about them, and then they're sure to tell you that you've missed the most worthwhile things. I got so tired at last of those everlasting Madonnas, I thought I would turn into a Madonna myself.
And the food one gets,
said Kala.
Yes,
agreed Mama.
Not even a dish of honest meat soup. It is awful the way they cook.
And Kala had become tired from traveling. She was always tired, that was the trouble. Sophie came to live with them, and her presence was a real help. Mama-in-law had to admit that Sophie understood both housekeeping and art, though you would hardly have expected a knowledge of the last from a person of her modest background. Moreover, she was honest and loyal. She showed that clearly when Kala lay sick, fading away. If the case is everything, that case should be strong, or it is all over. And it was all over with the case Kala died.
She was so beautiful,
said Mama.
She was very different from the antiques because they're all so damaged. Kala was completely perfect, just as a beauty should be.
Alfred wept and the mother wept, and both went into mourning. The black dresses became Mama very well, so she wore her mourning the longer. Moreover, she soon experienced another grief when she saw Alfred marry again. And he married Sophie, who had no looks at all.
He has gone from one extreme to the other,
Said Mama-in-law.
gone from the most beautiful to the ugliest. How could he forget his first wife? Men have no constancy. Now, my husband was entirely different, and he died before I did.
Pygmalion got his Galatea.
Said Alfred.
Yes, that's what the wedding song said. I really fell in love with a beautiful statue, which came to life in my arms, but the soulmate that heaven sends down to us, one of its angels who can comfort and sympathize with and uplift us, I have not found a one till now. You came to me, Sophie, not in the glory of superficial beauty, but fair enough, prettier than was necessary. The most important thing is still the most important. You came to teach a sculptor that his work is only clay and dust, only the outward form in a fabric that passes away, and that we must seek the spirit within. Poor Kala, ours was but a wayfarer's life. In the next world, where we shall come together through sympathy, we shall probably be half strangers to each other.
That was not spoken kindly, said Sophie.
Not like a true Christian. In the next world, where there is no marriage, but where, as you say, souls find each other through sympathy, where everything beautiful is developed and elevated.
Her soul may attain such completeness that it may resound far more melodiously than mine. Then you will again utter the first exciting cry of your love, beautiful, beautiful. The narrative highlights how Alfred, initially captivated by Kala's physical beauty, becomes disillusioned when he realizes that external attractiveness does not necessarily guarantee a deep and meaningful connection. Alfred's journey is one of transformation. He begins by admiring Kala's external beauty, much like the sculptor Pygmalion falling in love with his own creation. However, the eventual disillusionment with the superficiality of this connection leads to a more profound understanding of love. The story suggests a warning against prioritizing external appearances over inner qualities. The marriage to Kala, solely based on her physical beauty, results in an unfulfilling and transient relationship. Alfred's shift towards valuing Sophie for her honesty, loyalty, and inner qualities signifies a maturation in his understanding of love. Alfred's profession as a sculptor serves as a metaphor for the way he initially perceives relationships. The emphasis on molding and shaping clay reflects his early focus on external appearances. However, the story suggests that true artistry lies in recognizing the inherent value of the material, the soul beneath the surface. Kala's illness and eventual death emphasize the fragility of life. Despite her external beauty, she succumbs to sickness, highlighting the fleeting nature of physical attributes. This serves as a reminder that true connections should be based on deeper, enduring qualities. The contrast between Alfred's two marriages emphasizes the shift from a visually striking but shallow connection with Kala to a more profound and enduring relationship with Sophie. This underscores the importance of choosing a life partner based on shared values and genuine compatibility. Alfred's reflections on the next world and the potential development of souls through sympathy suggest a theme of spiritual growth. The story implies that true beauty and completeness lie in the evolution of the soul rather than in external appearances. Alfred's acknowledgement of the limitations of his art and the impermanence of outward forms reflects a lesson in humility. This humility contributes to his growth as an individual, allowing him to appreciate the enduring qualities that make a meaningful connection. In summary, the story explores the evolution of Alfred's understanding of love and relationships, moving from a superficial infatuation with external beauty to a deeper appreciation of inner qualities and enduring connections. It serves as a reflection on the transient nature of physical appearances and the importance of looking beyond the surface in matters of the heart. This is the end of the storytelling session. Do you like the fairy tales I tell? Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to listen to more interesting fairy tales. Bye-bye!